Okay, this is the introductory shiur for our second part of the mitzvah of honoring Kohanim. Now, keep in mind that although the sugyas are split into two parts and we're doing this in two different shiurim, they're not dependent on one or the other. So if you missed the first one, it doesn't mean that you're not going to understand this one. The only thing that we came to the conclusion in the first one, which is important to know for the second, is that there is a mitzvah to honor Kohanim, and our svara was that the mitzvah is to reflect the uniqueness of the Cohen by honoring them. Okay, so that was our svara for the first one, and now for the second shiur, we're going to be looking at two different halachos that apply here that I think are usually there's a lot of halachos in any single mitzvah, right? So this is the 32nd mitzvah of the Torah. So this would be no different. That there would be a lot of halachos, and we generally don't look at each detailed halacha. We never get out of one mitzvah if we went beyond on each single mitzvah. But what we're doing here instead is we're looking at two different halachos, which I think are fundamental to the understanding of the mitzvah as a whole, and that's why. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is a Gemara in Gittin. Okay, and this is the Gemara says as follows. We had seen some of the Gemaras before in the first year, but this is a different Gemara that we hadn't seen. Amalei Abaya Rav Yosef. So Abaya says to Rav Yosef, "Mipnei Darchei Shalom." Are we really going to the Mishna and said that we give a Cohen the first aliyah out of what's called Darchei Shalom in order to make sure that there's no fights about who gets the first aliyah? So the Gemara says, wait, it's deoraisa. There's a mitzvah, right? We have a mitzvah to give honor to the Kohanim. So what are you talking about that we give him the first aliyah for Darchei Shalom? We give it to him the first aliyah because there's a mitzvah to give him the first aliyah. So he says, Amalei deoraisa umipnei Darchei Shalom, right? Yes, it's true. There's a mitzvah to do this, but also we institute this for Darchei Shalom for peace, in order to keep the peace as well. So the Gemara challenges and says, wait, but the whole entire Torah is for peace, as it says, its ways are pleasant and peaceful. So what's the novelty here? Okay. So Abaya, right? So this is no. Abaya says no. There's a specific reason why we have to say this. If you have two people eating together, so we wait for a person, for a great person to come before they start eating. Shlosha, but if there's already three people at the table, then we don't wait. The guy that makes hamotzi, so he's the first one that eats. But let's imagine that a host is the one making hamotzi at the table, but his Rebbe is there, so he wants his Rebbe to have first. So or anybody that's greater than him, harshus biyado, he's allowed to do that. That's fine. So Mar says that that's only when it comes to a meal. Okay, it's only when it comes to a meal. But if it's in a shul and the Cohen is supposed to get the first aliyah, so he's not allowed to give kavod to anybody else. The aslut nuya, because that leads to fights. Okay, so a couple questions here. The Gemara pits the halacha of putting a Cohen first as either deoraisa or out of Darchei Shalom, right? That's the Gemara's original question. If they Darchei Shalom, deoraisa, right? So that was the thing. So it is clear that Darchei Shalom then obviously isn't deoraisa, or else the Gemara wouldn't say, wait, it's a mitzvah deoraisa. So if it's not deoraisa, this concept of Darchei Shalom, of keeping the peace, so then what is it? What's the nature of this idea of Darchei Shalom? Okay, Abaya seems to come along and say he knocks out the whole mitzvah, right? In his challenge, right? The whole halacha is gone, right? He says the whole Torah is for Darchei Shalom, right? So this halacha, he's saying that the halacha isn't unique, and then seems to say you can give honor to anyone who you want. So Abaya can't argue with the Mishnah. So what's Abaya really coming to do in this halacha? Okay. And how does Abaya understand this mitzvah of וקדושתו, of sanctifying a Cohen? Okay, then we said that Mar, right, who in this Mar just means Mister, so Mar here happens to be Rabba. So Rabba disagrees with Abaya when it comes to a shul, right? It says lo shanu el besuda, aval bebeis knesses lo, but when it comes to a shul, no, he says, right? So how does Rabba understand Abaya's understanding of what's going on, right? He's arguing with him, so how is he understanding it? And what's Rabba's position in this halacha in the first place? Okay, opening salvo of 5 questions here. Okay, we have a Yerushalmi, right? Yerushalmi has the same Mishnah as us, right? But the Gemara Yerushalmi says, Milsa der Rishuma by Yochai, Shehumi divrei Torah, right? So Rishuma by Yochai says this idea of Darchei Shalom is actually deoraisa. The Tani Rabbi Shimon by Yochai, right? V'chsov Moshe Satorah Zosvi. Now Cohen b'nei Levi. So if you remember, he's quoting the pasuk of Rav Masna. Remember, we had a four-way machlokes. So he quotes that same pasuk and says, you see, they're giving the Cohen first. Is a deoraisa. So v'achar kach, they'll call Ziknei Yisrael, and afterwards, after the Kohanim and Levim got the Torah, the whole B'nai Yisrael got it. Okay. Milsa Rabbi Shimon ben Levi Shumi Divrayim, but Rabbi Shimon ben Levi disagrees and says that this is Midarabanan. Damar Yeshua Miyamai Lo Berachti Lefnei Kohen V'Linachti Levarach Yisrael Fanav. Right. So okay, so he says that he followed this halacha. So you have a fundamental machlokas here between Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who holds that this idea of Darchei Shalom, giving the Kohen first, is a Torah command, and Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, who holds it's midarabanan. So how do we explain their debate? How do we understand their debate? Okay, pretty simple question. Saw that coming out of left field. Okay, the Tosos here in Chulin says, he says kidashto, right? So the chol davar shekdusha leftoach rishon ulevarach rishon asmachtahi. So Tosos says there's a concept of what's called a smachta. A smachta is not deoraisa. It means that there's a halacha that the Rabbanan have, and they associate this halacha with a pasuk. So this idea of giving the Cohen first, Tosos says is not a deoraisa at all. He holds that V'kidashto is not deoraisa, but the rabbis came along and there is an idea, maybe because of Darchei Shalom, we'll have to examine it, to give the Cohen first. So if the idea is to give the Cohen first, right? But the rabbis say, oh, you see, there's a pasuk v'kidashto, but it's not that the source or the idea of the halacha is deoraisa, right? That's not the concept, okay? But it's rather Tosos is holding it must be midirabanan. So where did Tosos get this from? How did he come along with this conclusion that it's not? Okay, let's see this Gemara in Nedarim. Okay, so the Gemara in Nedarim says, Amar Rabba, Shari le tzurba midirabanan, lememar tzurba midirabanan, anan shari Tigra Barisha. We allow Talmidei Chachamim to take the first aliyah. Dechsiv v'nei David Kohanim hayu. Ma Cohen el Tavarosh, af Talmid Chacham el Tavarosh. Just as a Cohen can take first, so too can a Talmid Chacham. Okay. So it seems from the Gemara's conclusion that Darchei Shalom comes to prevent the Cohen from honoring Talmidei Chachamim. But honoring Talmidei Chachamim is also a Torah command. Right, so if that's true, right, so and we see that Talmid Chacham should also get first, right, so and this is going to be what we're going to be looking at here. How can a Rabbanan come along, institute a halacha that pushes off a mitzvah aseh, a Torah command of honoring Talmidei Chachamim? Remember, we saw the sugya that there's a mitzvah to honor Talmidei Chachamim, deoraisa. So now the Rabbanan are going to come along and say that you have to give a coin first to prevent fights. How can they do that and push off a Talmid Chacham's honor, which is a Torah command, right? And as you have, right, this is the Rabba that says it's called Talmid Chacham mitzvah lahadro, right? Afal pi she'ein Rabba, you have a mitzvah deoraisa, nesay v'takum darkei p'nei zaken, right? Zaken zeh shekana chachma. We have a halacha that we have to give a Talmid Chacham the first halacha. How can we do that, right? And the Gemara, right, this Gemara that we see in the Nedarim, right, even says that Talmid Chacham takes first. Be just like a Cohen. So how can we understand our Gemaras in Gittin that said that a Cohen comes first? That's right. That seems to be hard to understand. Okay, let's look at another Gemara here. This is the Gemara in Megillah. Gemara in Megillah says, Shalom Tamida, that's Rabbi Freda. But me harachti yamim. So how did you live so long? So he says, Amar le miyamai lo kidamti adam lebeis medrash lo birachti lefnei Cohen. So my whole life, I never had anybody come before me to the base marriage. I always got there first, right? And the Talmud, and I never took up bracha. I never took the first aliyah before a Cohen. Also Talmid Chacham chai v'misa. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, hold on a second, right? The Gemara, we have a saying of Rabbi Yochanan that he holds that any Talmid Chacham that allows somebody to make a bracha before him, so he's chayav misa. In other words, Talmid Chacham has a responsibility to uphold the covenant of the Torah. So if he has a responsibility to uphold the covenant of the Torah, he can't let an ignoramus Cohen take an aliyah before him. Shemar kol masonai avo mavis. Okay, so right, so he says, how could you allow that to happen, right? So the Ritva says here to understand. Okay, so how does that work? What you're doing by allowing what Talmid Chacham that allows a Kohen to take the first aliyah, he's allowing the covenant of the Torah to be mizazel, means it to be like brought down, right? That's you're allowing a level of the Torah, but to go down a level, to shame the Torah almost, right? So, and you're not allowed to do that, right? So so how's that possible? So he says, "Dafka keshekolim levarach me'atzmo, domer shelo roy levarach. Aval in Talmid Chacham omer lo levarach v'nimar dershusa hu mishmevarach em bekach klum." Right? So he says that's if the Cohen comes up and it says the bracha on his own. He comes up, he says, "I'm taking the first aliyah," right? But if the Talmid Chacham says that you should take Cohen, you take the first aliyah, that's the problem. If the Cohen goes ahead and inserts himself first, that's not a zilzul b'Torah. Okay. So so here we have right. So the Ritva is saying that he qualifies this Gemara by saying it's only zilzul b'chol Torah when the Kohen takes the kavod for himself. But if the Chacham allows him, right, so that shows that the Kohen is differential to the Talmid Chacham. Now, he wouldn't take it, but the Talmid Chacham is saying go first. So then he shows he's still showing kavod to the Torah because he's waiting for the Talmid Chacham's permission. Okay, so the Gemara seems to say that it's zilzul b'chol Torah. Right, it denigrates the honor of the Torah if the Cohen and the Chacham aren't equal. But the Ritva seems to be adding that even if the Chacham and the Cohen aren't equal, if the Chacham is mocha, if he allows it, it's not zilzul b'chol Torah. So why is that true? And that's our question on the Ritva. Okay, okay, let's go on here and let's see a Tosfos. Okay, so Tosfos says, Kikamar Havashavim, Bekasha, my Revusa, Haichsi, Vikidashto, Lechol Davar Shekvedusha, Levarach Rishon, Shlomar Deshavin Lavdavka, Elaklomar Shakoin Nami Tamid Chacham, Alnamein Chashuv Kamoso, right? So this case also says, right, what about a mitzvah of Vikidashto? He says, how could the Talmid Chacham take the first aliyah? We have a mitzvah of Vikidashto, of sanctifying the Kohen, right? And that should have the Kohen go first. So it also says that as long as the Kohen is a chacham, right? He doesn't have to be equal in chachma, but as long as as long as the Kohen is also a scholar, right? So he can make the bracha first, right? So that would still be the kidashto. So the question is, why doesn't the mitzvah of the kidashto apply when it comes to an ignorant Kohen in the presence of a Talmid Chacham? Who cares if he's ignorant, right? He's still Cohen, and there's still a mitzvah of kidashto, of sanctifying him, of reflecting that uniqueness that he has, right? So how is zilzul b'chol Torah pushing off the mitzvah of the kidashto? We're playing it both ways, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. We're asking on the one hand, this is our conflict here. How does the kidashto take a second seat to giving kavod to the Talmid Chacham? And at the same time, we're saying the other way. How is it that I don't remember which way I just said, but how does the kidashto push off giving honor to a Talmid Chacham, and how does giving honor to a Talmid Chacham push off the kidashto? You have two deoraisas. So which way are we going? And we see Gemaras that are reflecting both ways, and Rishonim that are reflecting both ways. So how do we understand which one pushes off, right? So what's the svara of those that give honor to the Kohen even above a Talmid Chacham, right? That's our essential question here. Okay, and that you see, the Mishnah says, Cohen called him a Levi Yisrael Mamzer L'Sin, V'Nesin L'Ger, V'Ger M'Shuchor, and Islam is Ma'Shuchor M'Shavim, right? So this is the order of Kavod. Cohen comes before Levi Yisrael comes before Mamzer. Okay, so right, so now Im Haya Mamzer Talmid Chacham, the Kohen Gadol Amaretz, but let's say the Mamzer is a Talmid Chacham, and the Kohen Gadol is an Amaretz. So who gets Kavod first? So the Mamzer Talmid Chacham, Kohen Gadol Amaretz. So even if it's the Kohen Gadol, the Mamzer Talmid Chacham gets more honor. This Gemara in Haria, in this Mishnah, in Haria says. So the Mishnah is saying here that the Talmid Chacham goes first, even if he's a mamzer, ahead of the ignoramus Kohen Gadol. Okay, and then you have the Gemara here, and Hariya says Cohen Kodem Alevi Shnemar Bnei Amram Aaron and Moshe v'Yigdel Aaron v'Yigdishu Kodesh Kodashim. Right, so it says go so far as to bring a pasuk to show, and that, if you remember, it's not that important, but this pasuk was the pasuk that was brought, I think, if I'm not mistaken, by the second opinion in our Gemara. Okay, so those are the Gemaras here, and the Rambam. This is a fascinating. This is in a letter of the Rambam I found. He says as follows. Look what he says. Amar Moshe, Yuduim heim divrei philosophaim ki lenefesh brios v'cholei kamo sheyesh leguf brios choles. He says, we understand there's mental illness just like this physical illness. The Rambam says. V'osa machos hanefesh brios shedibru behem heim b'ashkafos v'midos. Right, so where are these mental maladies come from? So this is when a person has a sickness in their soul, right? So or in their way that they look at their character or the way they look at the world. And these are unique to certain people. So I call these type of mental maladies that either come from a deficiency in one's character and a deficiency in one's philosophy of life, I call them the personal illnesses. And within these illnesses, you have some basic principles, right? You only find people that are saved from these in very unique times. And what do we see? We find one of these maladies is arrogance, where a person thinks that they're more perfected than they actually are. Okay, he says that's a mental illness, where a person walks around and thinks that they're all that. Okay, he considers that a mental illness. Very interesting. He says that a person thinks that they're deserving of something more than they are. The Rambam here in this letter, I don't know why I didn't bring down this part of the text, but the Rambam in his letter is referring to Kohanim that take an aliyah before Talmid Chacham. So he says that Cohen thinks of himself more than he actually is, right? And the Talmid Chacham should be the one that gets it. Okay, fascinating. And now the Rambam's going to really go off. Okay, there's a lot of text here, so let's go through this quickly. The Rambam, right? So the Rambam here is a commentary in the Mishnah, and he says as follows. He says, this thing that we see, that a Cohen gets the first aliyah in Shul. So we see that this occurs, this minhag that a Talmid Chacham gets, that a Kohen Gadol, gets an aliyah first. Doesn't make a difference if he's a scholar or he's an ignoramus. It doesn't make a difference if there's somebody that's greater than him, or not. This has no foundation in the Torah. He says this is completely incorrect what people are doing. It's not found in the Gemara. And this is not according to the halacha that we give a Kohen the first aliyah if he's an ignoramus and there's somebody greater than him. Okay. He says, no basis in halacha. So he says, I find these people, these must have been some type of Jews out there that do this also. Right? So he says, even though we find that these people are usually saved from these, they're usually very careful and they know the halacha, and yet we find that they're making the same mistake. And we find that they're usually okay and know the halacha, and they usually follow the Gemara. I don't know why they're also making this mistake. This is our tradition. This is what the tradition is. Cohen goes before a Levi and a Levi before Yisrael. Right? He says, the pasuk says, God says, v'kidashto. And we see that we give them the first aliyah, and we give them the first chance to make a bracha, and we give them the first good meal, good portion at the table. But when does this halacha apply though? When there's no one greater than them in chachma. Right, that's all right. That's only when there's nobody greater than them. So then we go according to Cohen Levi Yisrael. But that's only when there's no Talmid Chacham that's greater than them. Okay, so the Rambam goes on. This is the Gemara we just saw in Harius. When do we give the Cohen first? When everybody's equal in their Chachma. If you have a mamzer that's a student of a Chacham, the Cohen Gadol Amaretz, and you have an ignoramus Cohen Gadol, mamzer Talmid Chacham Kodim Kol Davar. The mamzer Talmid Chacham comes first. This is a straight Gemara. The Rambam says it's a Mishnah. It will show us a Talmud she'achar echad hachacham kara b'sefer Torah Rishon b'Shabbos with Rabbi v'Rusi Agdolim b'Yoter b'Kohen Eretz Yisrael Ayusham Shu Gadol b'Hem Chacham. We see incidences in the Gemara that are quoted that Talmid Chacham got the first Aliyah and there were Kohanim in the room. V'chein Amar Rav Kara b'Kohanim, right? We see like the Rav was read the first Aliyah. Kamar Kara Rishon b'Makam Kohen, right? There was a Kohen in the room. Rav was in the room and they gave the Aliyah to the Rav. Because he was greater in Chachma than the Kohanim. There's no machlokas. We have another one of our principles. Not only that, but we have a Kohen is allowed to give the honor to somebody else. But rather, with the Chachamim came along, even though this would be okay according to the Torah, the Chachamim came along and said out of Darchei Shalom, the Cohen can't do this. He can't give his aliyah away to somebody who's equal to him. That's not a Cohen. Because then, right, this can come to fights in Shul. Right? So why? Because somebody's going to say, why did the Cohen give him the aliyah? He should have given me the aliyah instead. So therefore, we said, no, Cohen gets first. Right? But again, only if there's no Talmid Chacham. That's only if there's no Talmid Chacham. Okay? So the Rambam here in the Parish Mishnah, right? He maintains the halacha of giving the Cohen first aliyah only applying in a situation where a Cohen and Talmid Chacham are together and equal in their Chachma. Right? So then the Cohen can't be mevater in his kavod because it'll start fights. Okay? But how did the Rambam in his explanation in this Mishnah, in this explanation of the Mishnah, in this source, how does he understand the mitzvah of the kiddushto? As he's saying, the kiddushto only applies if there's no chacham in the room. So how does he understand this mitzvah of the kiddushto? How does he understand it? Okay. And in the Sefer Mitzvos, this is we saw last time, in the Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam wrote, "Afilu yimnu also lo nishma." So right, so he says that even if the Kohen says, "I don't want the kavod," right? You don't listen to him, right? Because it's not about him. So, but now what does he write? He writes that if the guy wants to give it away, right? If the Kohen wants to give it away, he's allowed to. So the Rambam seems to be contradicting himself. So that is those are our two questions on this Rambam. Okay. Now look at this Rambam. This is blow your mind Rambam here. Okay, this is a Rambam in a responsa. Okay, so Sheila Yudzayin, 17th question that they had asked him in a series of questions. So there was a Gemara that says that why weren't the Talmid Chachamim zocha? Why didn't they merit to have Torah come out from them? Right? There's a period of time where the Talmid Chachamim didn't have it. So he says, Rav Yehuda answers because they didn't take the first aliyah. Okay, so tshuva ma perishano bezeh. So they want to know from the Rambam how do you understand this? So he says, you're not allowed to stop the Talmid Chacham from getting an aliyah to the Torah. So the Talmid Chacham, it was very hard for them to insist on getting the first aliyah. So when they came time for the first aliyah, and the Gabbai looked around, so what should have happened was the Talmid Chacham should have said, I'm a scholar. Please give me the first aliyah. And they didn't do this, right? So, right, because it was very difficult for them to put themselves out there like that. Right? So what's this Gemara saying? So he says he should have said, no, the Cohen doesn't get the first aliyah. I get the first aliyah. I'm a Talmid Chacham. He should have guarded the honor of the Torah. Right? So he says, so they get punished for this. yeah, it's uncomfortable to sit there and say, I'm a Tam Chacham, I go first. But they get punished because what are they doing? Like we saw the Ritva before. They're mizazel b'chavod Torah. They take out the covenant of Torah. Shein Torah yatzas from them. And now the Torah doesn't come out from them. That's their punishment, that they don't get to spread. They didn't guard the covenant of Torah. And therefore, Torah doesn't come from them. So he says that like we just saw, that the whole idea of giving the Cohen first is only when there's no one else that's equal to him in chachma, right? Right? And we saw that Rav took the first aliyah, right? So he says that's why they were punished, because they did not take the first aliyah. Okay, so that's the Rambam in this response. But now watch this. The Rambam in the halachos. This is the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. Watch, this is amazing. He comes along and he says, in every Kriya Torah that we have, the Cohen gets the first aliyah, and afterwards the Levi, and then Yisrael. And this is the halacha everywhere today. Shafilu Cohen Amaretz Kodem Likros Lefnei Chacham Gadol Yisrael. Even an ignoramus Cohen comes along before a Chacham Gadol Yisrael. He says the exact opposite. Everything he's just railed against in his tshuva, in his parish, in the Mishnayos, in his letter, every single thing he's saying, it goes against. But if there's no Cohen there, then anybody who's greater gets the first aliyah. Okay, so fine. So the Rambam, how do we understand this Rabba? He goes off on about it, and then he just says this is the simple minhag that you see out there. Okay, right? That's fascinating. Okay, so now these next couple of sources are not built up for questions. This is what we're going to see. The Sefer Chinuch says, "Va'achshav b'zman hazeh lo orim mi sheikdi matzmo l'shum kohen b'fnei chachmaso ve'ikav anava yiras Hashem." Right. So the Chinuch says that today we don't see anyone that steps forward and takes a aliyah before Cohen. We don't find any Talmidei Chacham that do this. Right. So he says that's right out of anava. The Mishnah Berurah says the Fnei Chacham Gadol says ve'ein kan bizayon l'chavod Torah. He says nowadays that Chacham, the Cohen gets an aliyah before a Chacham. He says that's not bizayon of the kavod. That doesn't take away the kavod of the Torah, like we had seen the Ritva said. The kevan shechina minhag ein kan bizui, because since that's become the minhag, that's there's no bizui. Okay, just something interesting. The Beis Yosef says Chasav Mari kolon b'shorish test al kal shayu nogin sheb'shams bereshis hayu echad akal. So we see this on Simchas Torah. We auction off the aliyos, right, for the money for the time for the base Knesset, right? In order that they okay, so I don't know what happened there. Okay, so you see he gets the first aliyah. And if there's a Cohen there, so the Cohen always says it's okay, right? The ultimate base Knesset, and he leads the base Knesset. Mitzvah. There was 1 year the Cohen didn't want to buy it for himself. The Gam Loratz Alasis Begesis, they also didn't want to leave the Shul. So now everybody's got a problem. How can they sell the aliyah if there's a Cohen there? So what do they do? It's crazy. They called the police and they said, don't let that guy into Shul. This Cohen can't come into Shul. That way, we can give the aliyah to the guy that pays the most, and we don't have to worry about being mevatel on this halacha. Amazing, right? Okay, so that's the end of the introductory shiur, and b'li neder, we will have shiur on Sunday.